All right, guys, Rene Descartes, A Discourse on the Method. We are on part three. Part three, guys. A Discourse on the Method. Finally, just as it is not enough, before beginning to rebuild the house in which one lives, to do no more than demolish it, make provision for materials and architects, or become oneself trained as an architect, or even to have carefully drawn up the plans. But one must also provide oneself with another house in which one may be comfortably lodged while work is in progress. So also, in order not to remain indecisive in my actions while my reason was forcing me to be so in my judgments, and to carry on living from then on as happily as I could, I formed a provisional moral code for myself consisting in only 3 or 4 maxims which I should like to share with you. The first was to obey the laws and customs of my country. So the first was to obey the laws and customs of my country and to adhere to the religion in which God, by His grace, had me instructed from my childhood, and to govern myself and everything else according to the most moderate and least extreme opinions. So one was to obey the law, adhere to the religion that was taught to him as a child, and to govern myself and everything else according to the most moderate and least extreme opinions, being those commonly received among the wisest of those with whom I should have to live. For having begun already to discount my own opinions because I wished to subject them all to rigorous examination, I was certain that I could do no better than to follow those of the wisest. He discounted his own opinions or his previous ones because I wished to subject them all to rigorous examination. I was certain that I could do no better than to follow those of the wisest. And although there may be as many wise people among the Persians and the Chinese as among ourselves, it seemed to me that the most useful thing to do would be to regulate my conduct by that of the people among whom I was to live, and that for me to know what their opinions really were, I had to take note of what they did rather than what they said. Not only because in the present corrupt state of our morals, few people are willing to declare everything they believe, but also because some do not even know what they believe. For the mental act by which we believe something being different from that act by which we know that we believe it. For the mental act by which we believe something. For the mental act by which we believe something being different from that act by which we know that we believe it. Being different from that act by which we know that we believe it often results in one act being present without the other. And I chose only the most moderate among many opinions which were equally widely received, as much because these are always easiest to practice and likely to be the best, excesses all being usually bad, as to wander less far from the true path in case I should be wrong. And that having followed one extreme, it transpired that I should have followed the other. And in particular, I placed in the category of these excesses all personal commitments by which one relinquishes some of one's freedom. I place in the category of these excesses all my personal commitments by which one relinquishes some of one's freedom. Not that I disapprove of the laws that, in order to counteract the inconsistency of those who are weak minded, permit men to make verbal undertakings or contracts with which bind them not to break them, in cases where they have some worthy plan, or even to guarantee the security of commerce, some plan which is no more than morally indifferent. But because I saw nothing in this world which remained always in the same state, and because in my own case I set myself the task of gradually perfecting my judgments and not of making them worse, I would have seen myself as sinning against good sense if, having once approved of something, I should have found myself obliged to take it to be good later on, when it might have ceased to be so, or I might have ceased to consider it so. My second maxim was to be as firm and resolute in my actions as I could, and to follow no less constantly the most doubtful opinions, but to follow no less constantly the most doubtful opinions. Once I had opted for them, then I would have it they had been the most certain ones. In this I imitated those travelers who, finding themselves lost in a forest, must not wander in circles, first to one side, then to the other, and still less stop in one place, but have to walk as straight as possible in one direction, and no alter course for weak reasons, even if it might only have been chance which had led them to settle on the direction they had chosen. For by this means, even if they do not end up precisely where they want to be, they will eventually reach somewhere where they will most likely be better off than the middle of a forest. I find that fascinating what he just said. Extremely fascinating. And in the same way as in life, we must often act without delay. It is a very certain truth that when it is not in our power to determine which the truest opinions are, we should follow those which are most likely to be true. And even though we might see no more probability in some rather than others, we must nevertheless opt for one set, and thereafter consider them not as being doubtful, insofar as they relate to the practice of life, but as altogether true and certain, because the reasoning that led us to opt for them is true and certain. This maxim was able from then on to free me from all the regret and remorse that usually troubles the consciences of weak and vacillating minds who are inconsistent and allow themselves to follow certain practices as though they were good, that they later judge to be bad. My third maxim was to endeavor always to master myself rather than fortune, to try to change my desires rather than to change the order of the world, and in general to settle for the belief that there was nothing entirely in our power except our thoughts, and after we have tried in respect of things external to us to do our best, everything in which we do not succeed is absolutely impossible as far as we are concerned. I think he's saying because he did all you could, so that which you do not succeed in must not be possible because you did your best. To try to change my desires rather than to change the order of the world. And in general, to settle for the belief that there was nothing entirely in our power except our thoughts. And after we have tried in respect of things external to us to do our best, everything in which we do not succeed is absolutely impossible as far as we are concerned. This alone seemed to me to be sufficient to prevent me from desiring anything in future which I cannot obtain, and thereby to make me content. For as our will is naturally inclined to desire only those things which our intellect represents to it as possible in some way, it is certain that if we consider all external goods as being equally beyond our power, we shall not feel any more regret at failing to obtain those which seem to be our birthright when deprived of them through no fault of our own. Then we shall, for not possessing the kingdoms of China and Mexico, then we shall, for not possessing the kingdoms of China and Mexico, and by making a virtue out of necessity, as the saying goes, we shall no more desire to be healthy when we are ill or free when we are in prison than we do now to have bodies made of matter as incorruptible as diamonds or wings to allow us to fly like birds. But I admit that it takes long practice and reiterated periods of meditation to make oneself used to seeing things from this angle, and I believe that it is principally in this that lay the secret of those philosophers who were able in earlier times to escape the tyranny of fortune, and in spite of suffering and poverty, to rival their gods in happiness. For through constant reflection on the limits laid upon them by nature, they convinced themselves so completely that nothing was in their power other than their thoughts. that this conviction alone was sufficient to prevent them from having any desire for anything else. And they controlled their thoughts so effectively that they thereby believed themselves with some reason to be richer, more powerful, freer, and happier than any other men who, not having this philosophy, never have this control over their desires, however favored by nature and fortune they may be. Finally, as a conclusion to this moral code, I decided to review the various occupations that men have in this life in order to try to select the best one, without wishing to pass judgment on the occupation of others. I came to the view that I could do no better than to continue in the one in which I found myself, that is to say, to devote my life to the cultivation of my reason and make such progress as I could in the knowledge of the truth following the method I had prescribed for myself. I had experienced such great joy since I began to employ this method that I did not believe that any sweeter or more innocent pleasures were to be had in this life, and as I discovered daily by its means a number of truths that seemed to me very important and generally unknown to other men, the satisfaction that I obtained from it filled my mind to such a degree that nothing else mattered to me. Besides, the three foregoing maxims were based only on the plan I had to continue to seek knowledge. For since God has given each of us an inner light to distinguish the true from the false, I would not have believed for one moment that I should content myself with the opinions of others if I had not intended in due course to use my own judgment to examine them, and I could not have avoided having scruples about following them if I had not hoped thereby to seize every opportunity to find better ones in case there were any. Finally, I should have not known how to limit my desires or achieve happiness if I had not followed a path by which I thought I was sure to acquire all the knowledge of which I was capable, and by the same means all the true goods that it would ever be in my power to obtain. And seeing that our will tends to pursue or shun only what our intellect represents to it as good or bad, and seeing that our will tends to pursue or shun only what our intellect represents to it as good or bad, it is sufficient to make a sound judgment in order to act well, and to judge as well as we can in order to do our best. That is to say, to acquire all the virtues and with them all the other goods we are capable of acquiring. And when we are certain that this state of affairs exists, we cannot fail to be happy. Once I had established these maxims and set them aside in my mind with the truths of faith, which have always held my which always held first place in my beliefs, I took the decision that as far as the rest of my opinions were concerned, I could freely undertake to rid myself of them. And seeing that I expected to be better able to complete this task in the company of others than by remaining shut any longer in the stove heated room in which I had all these thoughts, I set out on my travels again before winter was over. And through all the next 9 years, I did nothing but wander through the world trying to be a spectator rather than an actor in all the dramas that are played out on that stage. And reflecting particularly in each matter on what might make it suspect and give occasion for error, I proceeded to eradicate from my mind all the mistakes that might earlier have crept into it. And doing this, I was not copying those skeptics who doubt for doubting's sake, or skeptics who doubt for doubting's sake, and pretend to be always unable to reach a decision. For on the contrary, the aim of my whole plan was to reach certainty and reject shifting ground in the search for rock and clay. And in this, it seems to me I succeeded reasonably well, seeing that in trying to expose the falsity or uncertainty of the propositions that I was investigating, not by weak conjectures, but by clear and certain reasoning, I found none so doubtful that I could not draw some reasoning. I found none so doubtful that I could not draw some reasonably certain conclusion from it, even if the conclusion was no more than that the proposition in question contained nothing of certainty. And just as in demolishing an old building, one usually preserves the debris in order to use it in constructing a new one, so also in destroying all those of my opinions which I judged to be ill-founded, I made various observations and accumulated many experiences, which have been of use to me subsequently in establishing more certain opinions. What is more, I continued to practice the method I had prescribed for myself, for besides taking care generally to conduct all my thoughts according to these rules, I occasionally set aside a few hours which I spent applying it to difficulties in mathematics, or even to others which I could more or less translate into mathematical terms by removing from them all the principles of the other branches of knowledge which I did not find solid enough. You will see I have done this to many problems that are dealt with in this volume. And so while apparently living in the same way as those who having no occupation other than leading a blameless and agreeable life, take care to keep their pleasures free from vices, and who, in order to enjoy their leisure without becoming bored, engage in all those pastimes that are honorable, I never stop pursuing my plan and making progress in the knowledge of truth, perhaps more than if I had done anything else than read books and spend time in the company of men of letters. However, those 9 years passed by before I had reached any decision about the questions that are often debated among the learned, or had begun to look for the foundations of any philosophy which might be more certain than that which is commonly received. And the example of the many excellent minds who, having embarked on this project before me, did not appear to have succeeded, led me to see it as so difficult that I would perhaps not have dared to undertake the task so early if I had not learned that some people were already spreading the rumor that I had completed it. I cannot say on what they based this opinion. If I had done anything to contribute to it by what I had said in public, it must have been by owning up to what I did not know with greater freedom than is usual among those who have undertaken some study, and perhaps also by revealing the reasons that I had to doubt much that others take to be certain, and perhaps also by revealing the reasons that I had to doubt much that others take to be certain, rather than by boasting of any positive knowledge. So it's kind of like his Socratic moment, you know? Socratic moment right here. Him owning up to the things, to realizing that he doesn't know everything. So it's a Socratic moment. I'm gonna Socratic moment. Descartes. Socratic moment. But having enough self-esteem not to wish to be taken for other than I was, I came to think that it was necessary for me to try by every possible means to make myself worthy of the reputation I was being given. And it is now just 8 years since this desire made me decide to move away from all the places where I might have acquaintances and to retire here in a country in which the long period of war has established such good discipline that the armies that are maintained here seem only to serve to ensure that people enjoy the fruits of peace with correspondingly greater security, and where amid a teeming, active, great people that shows more interest in its own affairs than curiosity for those of others, I've been able to live as solitary and as retiring a life as I would in the most remote of deserts, while lacking none of the comforts found in the most populous cities. In a country in which the long period of war has established such good discipline that the armies that are maintained here seem only to serve to ensure that people enjoy the fruits of peace with correspondingly greater security, and where amid a teeming, active, great people that shows more interest in its own affairs than curiosity for those of others, I've been able to live as solitary and as retiring a life as I would in the most remote of deserts, while lacking none of the comforts found in the most populous cities. Having enough self-esteem not to wish to be taken for other than I was, I came to think that it was necessary for me to try by every possible means to make myself worthy of the reputation I was being given.